So that stitch width knob here comes through first, and then it's a matter of just lining up that shaft, getting that sitting in along with the 3 screws there for the mounting. Just start those screws, don't screw them in tight just yet. 2, and then that one down through there. So get them mostly tight, and then just back them off, say, 1/4 of a turn, just to leave it a little bit slack, and that allows you to bring the gear. So this here, the Elnagraph unit's got this gear here, and what it allows you to do is to mesh these gears properly. So you don't want it too loose, too slack there, and you don't want it pressing in too tight either. So that's why we just leave a little bit of slack there to start with. So you might notice that there's a little insulator here, and when you pull the shaft out, it will go past, the ring will go past here, but when you're installing it you want to get this out of the way. So you can move that sort of off to the side, or even just move it so that it's down here. Let's feed the shaft back in. But while we've got the shaft partway through, up to this position again, we want to put the worm gear back on, so with the holes facing to the left hand side. So get that down, and it's got to go down so that it meshes with that gear. So I'll just guide that into the hole there. Bit of a jiggle. There it is. It's on there now. Carry on through. I'm just holding it back with the screwdriver there. So we come through this bearing here, which I've just put a little drop of oil in, and then straight through into this the counterweight here. Push it all the way in whilst stopping the counterweight from pushing out, and then you can, once you've done that, you can push this little insulator in here, in behind here, back into position, so that it goes over that ring there. That's a bit tough to get to. Slide it that way a bit as well, and down, and it'll flick up over the ring in here. And once you've got that, just line up the screw holes. Nice and tight there. And now what we want to do is line up the hole here with the indentation that's in the shaft. So I'm just spinning the counterweight on the shaft there until I see that hole, that little indentation, come into view. Just lining that up. That's got it. And then screw in the grub screw, the 3mm Allen key. So that should just self-locate into that little indentation. Give that a good tighten. That's nice and tight. So when we're putting this back together, we want to reattach this here. So you can locate this little eccentric screw there back into its position. It's got it. So mount that in there first, might be easier. Got that little eccentric screw coming up through there with the screwdriver slot for adjustment towards you. We want to get that slot there, we want to get the pin that I showed you before through the slot. So again, a pair of tweezers. Yeah, I found that if you bring the stitch width lever back to 0, that's easier to get this that slider on there, and then you just need to line this. So the bottom end of that eccentric screw there will go into this hole here, and then the other the screw goes through here and into this hole here. So eccentric screw to there, and the actual screw, mounting screw, to there. So it's just a matter of lining that up. Now that's lined up there, just get the mounting screw, and just going to do that up lightly at this stage. And now if I turn the hand wheel, you can see the Elnagraph turning there, being driven by the worm gear. So now I just need to tighten the that screw, mounting screw for this worm gear, just into any of the holes. It doesn't matter at this stage because we'll set the timing later. So I'm just looking for the head of that screw there. I can see it there now. Let's get the 2mm Allen key and just tighten that right down. I can see the bottom end of the screw there through the hole, so that's located quite nicely there, and there we have a good working Elnagraph. Now there's a bit of play there, so we end up taking that out by adjusting these, adjusting it before we tighten this sort of chassis piece up here. Now there's two ways that can go. Let's just see if I've got that right. Turn there. It won't turn anymore for... Yeah, so I've got it 180 degrees out. I think that's got it. Yeah. So in this position here, it should click along into 1, 2, 3 and 4. In that position it should just slide freely and then turn one more for buttonhole. So yeah, that's correct there. Set this back to central position, your needle positioner. Next thing to do is to tighten, get these 3 screws, the mounting screws for this chassis of the Elnagraph tightened, but what we want to do is make sure that there's not too much play here. So the closer you move the chassis towards the shaft, the less play. There's a little bit of play there. Hold it a little bit closer. You don't want to put too much pressure on this. Just hold it close so that it doesn't go any further, but not much pressure. So I'm pushing towards the shaft this way, coming this way towards the back of the machine, and you can see there's not much play there at all. And then you want to turn the machine at least one full revolution to make sure there's no binding, so it's not too tight. Make sure it's not too tight. That should be nice and smooth. You can feel it getting a little bit tight there, so I'm just going to loosen this slightly and then retighten it. That's nice and free right around there. Probably a little bit too much slack there now though, might have gone too loose, so I'll just loosen that, come up a fraction. Still a little bit of play. Not much play there now. No binding. A little bit of play there, but when I come around here, it's starting to tighten. That's actually getting a little bit tight there. So I'll probably go around to the, so that just means that maybe the gear is not quite, well, not exactly round, if you know what I mean, just slightly out, so it's just a little bit tight in that position there. So you want to bring the Elnagraph around one whole revolution to check for tightness. That's a little bit too tight, so I'm going to make it just snug for that position. So that's loose, nice and loose on the wheel there now. Very slight amount of play there, and then just do a full revolution of this Elnagraph here. Make sure there's no tight spots. Yeah, that's fine. It's good there. Okay, once you've got that sorted, you can go and tighten the remaining two mounting screws. Just check that first one's tight. That's it. Okay, so that's all good there. And then we want to tighten this screw here that we loosened partially. Move that lever towards the back of the machine and then screw it down into the hole reasonably snug and tight, and just make sure the spring there is actually in the groove of the screw there. So you don't want it sitting out. You don't want it sitting out like that. See if you can see that. You actually want it to be up and into the groove. Remove the presser foot here and the plate. Just swing back the back door and grab the plate with two fingers behind it underneath, pull it up. Now this is just a rough setting for the timing. So we just turn the wheel here so that the needle bar is at its lowest position, and then turn the hook here so that you'll be able to see the hook point coming around here. So what we want is the point of the hook, which you can see hopefully just there, coming around so that it's opposite this screw. I've got a view from the back here, it's just a bit easier to see. And you want to bring the hook point around so that it's opposite this screw here roughly, and then once you've got that, I'll just bring that around. Roughly about there. So the hook point is sitting about here, nearly opposite that screw. And at that point, I'll check that the needle bar is still at its lowest position. and at that point we want to put the toothed belt. So while maintaining the position of the hook and the needle bar, so you can actually turn the hook with that, because the hook's actually attached to the bottom shaft there, so I'm just turning that to the correct position. Make sure that the needle bar's at the lowest point, and that's where you want to line up these teeth on the belt here to the pulley, and then you can just slide that on like so. Probably get away with turning that, and that, and you can double check that. Will bring the needle down to the bottom, needle to the bottom, and you can see that it's slightly out, so the hook timing is slightly retarded, so it's back, the hook timing's back here now. It should be up here, so probably just need to advance that timing by one tooth there. So I'll just slip this off. One tooth. See if that, so just checking that again. Yep, that's better. Bottom dead center is about there, and that hook is pretty close to where it needs to be. And now it's time to fit this mechanism here back on. So the thing to be careful with here, so you might notice this little piece here where the hole's actually closer to one side than the other. So the hole's actually closer to this side than what it is this side here. And so this piece with the longer gap between the edge and the side of the hole goes towards the front of the machine. When it sits in this here, you want that to be towards the front. So when you're putting this back in, this here, that part there faces the front, so you position that with the longer piece facing the front, and then just position that back over that shaft there. Get a little bit of oil on that. So push that back down onto the shaft. Meanwhile, that little piece of metal drops into that slot there, like so. And that's back in position. So the spring comes over this, over there, like that. Be a little bit of oil down here, and then the little C clip goes on. Okay, onto here. Just be careful not to ping it. Just like so, and that's all set to go there. So the first main adjustment to do is to make sure that the needle bar is coming up and over and back down again. Make sure that your is set to 4, set onto zigzag there, and that the needle position is in the centre. Have a close look here, you'll see that it's coming up, it's still on the left, still on the left, still on the left, it's at the top. Still, now it's just starting to come over now, so it's a bit late coming over to the right hand side, so that needs to be balanced. You do that by adjusting the worm gear, so that's what all those little holes were, they are so that you can adjust this setting here. So at the moment we've got a needle that's kind of travelling a bit like straight up, and then as it's coming down it's kind of coming across like that. It's coming out too late, so it's a little bit uneven. No, it's more sort of like that, but we want it to be more even. We sort of want it to be like that and not like that. So we're kind of balancing this parabola, I guess you call it. We want to advance the Elnagraph to make it swing the needle sooner, because it's swinging it too late. So this needs to be advanced. So we need to bring the Elnagraph around sooner. So it's just a matter of, I mean, you can do this just by trial and error. So you can just loosen that right off, and then one turn tight. Good. I'm going to turn it clockwise on the shaft and just try that and see whether that's brought it into the right position there. Seems okay. So it's moving across just before the top of its stroke, and it's doing the same on the other side as well. So that's fairly balanced. So next adjustment is, let's put a needle in. So you want to make sure you're putting a brand new needle in, because you definitely don't want to be doing this with a bent needle. Okay, so brand new needle. Put the plate back on. What we've got to do now is just make sure that the distance between the left hand side of the needle and the left hand side of the throat plate hole is the same on each throw. So that's the left, and likewise for the right. Now you can see there that the gap is very close. It's actually touching there on the right hand throw, but we've got clearance on the left, so that needs centralizing. So we just need to bring that needle to the left slightly, and you do that by adjusting this little eccentric screw here. But first of all you need to loosen the mount screw. So loosen that, just a small screwdriver. I'm going to bring the needle down into the plate there so I can actually see it while I do this adjustment. So I'm just going to turn that screw until I can see the needle moving closer to the left hand side, and then I'll just tighten this slightly, the mount, and let's check it, see if it's close. Probably a bit close to the left there now. Yeah, a bit too far. But I'll adjust that again so you can actually see what effect it's having here. So I'm loosening the clamping screw and adjusting the eccentric screw there, so you can see it moving. Yeah, I just want us to go part way. I can probably check that now. That's looking pretty good from my angle. Maybe a little bit close to the left still. Yeah, that's looking better. Yep, so now I'll just tighten the clamp screw and just double check that, because tightening the clamp screw could have had an effect. This would be a good time to put the hand wheel on. So I'll just put a small amount of oil there, hand wheel on, like that. The little stopper ring there can only go in one position. You'll notice a little flat on the matches up here. So you want the concave side, that's the bit that's kind of dished in there, so that's, you know, like a bowl there, to go in towards the hand wheel. So just line up the flats and then put the washer there on. So next goes the little clutch wheel here. So I'm going to back off the Allen grub screw here, just so that it's flush there. That's 2mm Allen key. It's actually loose there, so just watch that doesn't fall out. And then screw that tight there, and then do this up. Not too tight, doesn't need to be too tight, but just firm. And then you can test that the clutch is disengaging there, and it's loose and tightened up. Turning the machine there, so that's hand wheel back on. So next thing to do is the hook timing. So more than likely it's going to be out, so just start by removing the plate here. Get the cat out of the way, it would be quite handy. No, Molly. Remove the base here, just 3 screws. That's tight. Oh yeah, they're pretty tight. Good screwdriver required for some of these tight screws. So that'll expose the pulley there with the adjusting screws for setting the timing. Just to make things a bit easier to get to, mainly because my needle rise clamp here, I'll show you how this works. These are like feeler gauges almost. They're different thicknesses, so that one's 2.4mm, which is close to the amount of needle bar rise that we need. So what you do is you bring your needle right down to the bottom and you put one of these spaces in here, and then use a clamp, and then effectively what you do is you clamp that on. You know, we've clamped this clamp right up tight against this here. It means when I remove this, the needle bar is going to rise 2.4mm, and that's the rise that we want. So the hook point at that point needs to be directly behind the back of the needle. That's the hook timing. Because these clamps are a little bit big, these are designed for industrial machine use, not really specifically this model. So pretty much all you'd really need to do is get a little clamp made, and then a piece of just a flat piece of metal that's 2.45mm officially, or 0.0964 inches. To make things a bit easier to get those clamps on, if you had the right size clamps, you probably wouldn't need to do this. I'm going to remove the faceplate, and that's done by removing 2 screws here. One there, Phillips screws, and another one on the back end here. Just a pair of tweezers will do. Grab those out. That's it. And the plate won't come off yet. Yeah, there's a spring down in here, which attaches to the inside of the faceplate here and to the needle bar carrier. It can be a bit of a pain. It's quite easy to get off, but it can be quite a pain to get back on. So you know, if you do have the right clamps, or if you just want to sort of try and judge that rise of 2.4 millimeters, you could probably get away with it. But if you want to do it right, probably best, yeah, just get the right clamps, or just do what I'm doing here if you need to sort of get in there and get a more accurate reading. But yeah, that just unclips like that. So when you're putting it back on, you push that's the swing of the needle bar there. When you put it back on, you just need to get that end, get this very end of the spring there hooked around the back and through, sort of through the back of that hole there. It's a bit of a jiggle. Take note of where it is before you take it off, and then that will allow you to swing this whole plate out of the way. And that spring on the other end, it's the sort of this shorter stubby end, that's the one that goes onto the needle bar holder. And this end here, it's got sort of a shorter half round there, that hooks onto that pin there. It's got a little ledge on it, so it's actually easier to do that first when you're putting it back together. Hook that on there like that, so you know it's held on that pin there, and then you bring the faceplate around and hook that other end of the spring over the needle bar carrier. Bit fiddly, but in this situation here I would rather get an accurate reading on that needle bar rise there. Make sure the needle bar is at its lowest position, about there. Some machines actually have little marks on the needle bar, so the likes of some of the Singers and whatnot will actually have timing marks or needle bar rise marks on the etched into the needle bar, so you don't need any of these special clamps. You can just do it by eye then. But if we want to get this reasonably accurate, this is pretty much the only way to do it. I could just get the edge of it in there, hoping I can get my clamp to bring that up. I've got the spacer between the bottom of the needle bar bearing and the needle clamp, so just gently tighten that needle clamp up. So when I take this out, so that gap in there now should be 2.4 millimeters, pretty close to it. So turn the machine in operating direction just to bring the clamp up to the bottom, and that needle now has risen 2.4 millimeters. Yeah, there's a tolerance of between 2.6 millimeters and 2.3, but 2.45 is the ideal. Maximum needle bar rise of 0.1023 inch, minimum needle bar rise of 0.0905 inch, and as I said before, ideal is 0.0964 inch. One side effect to removing that faceplate is the spring actually centralizes the needle. You just have to hold pressure on the right hand side so the needle comes as far to the left as possible, which would be the center. That's the center position there. You could check that by putting the needle plate back on if you wanted, but if you don't remove that faceplate like I just have, that won't be a problem. The spring will pull it into place. I can see that the timing's out. Now you probably can't see it there because it's sort of hiding in behind that feed dog there, so I might take that feed dog out and just make it a bit clearer to see. Just a note, if you ever do remove the feed dogs from these machines, just note that the screws can be quite tight, which means you've got to put a lot of pressure down on the screw, and that strains the feed dog carrier. So I just support the feed dog here with another screwdriver, just sort of leave it on the side of the machine. Pay to put a piece of rag there to stop it from marking the machine, and just support just that downward pressure there, because these can be very tight. Just like that. Okay, so that's going to give us a bit more breathing space in there now. Just check that that needle's centralised. I think it is. Yeah. So without the spring, you know, this needle can float over here, but if you bring it back to its stopper, it's in the central position. So you just have to make sure you check that when you're setting the timing. I'll bring the clamp here up to the bottom of the bearing, so it just touches the bearing, and that's needle bar risen 2.4 millimeters there. And if we have a close look down here, I'll put a piece of paper in just in behind it for contrast, if that helps. The hook point is right there, and there's a gap. It should be right behind the needle, directly behind. So the hook timing's too late, so I just want to advance that timing slightly. We do that in here. 2 Allen grub screws. They are 2mm. So I'll loosen those. I have to remove the clamp to get to both of those. So the clamp was clamping the needle bar, obviously it was stopping the machine from turning over. Now that those 2 grub screws are loose, this shaft's no longer turning, so we can adjust the timing here. When you tighten these screws though to adjust the timing, you need to make sure that there's no end play in here. And then, yeah, you just want it tight enough to drive and loose enough to be able to adjust it. Yeah, now you can see end play here. So when I tighten this back up, I just need to be careful. See that? Now there's no end play. Okay, I've brought the needle bar back up to 2.4 millimeters. I've actually got my hand under the machine and just turning that shaft with my right hand while holding the machine. I can see that hook coming around there, so I'm just bringing it in behind the needle. So now that hook point is behind the needle. You want the point of it to be in the center of the needle. And just remember to keep this, push it to the left. Now there's a slight gap there. Hopefully you can see that. So the point now of the hook is directly behind the center line of the needle, and the needle bar's to the left. It's on the stopper in the central position. So that timing is correct. Now I'm just going to gently tighten those screws. There's end play quite a bit. So I'll push this to the right, that one to the left, and I'm just going to nip this screw reasonably tight there. Now that timing shouldn't have moved. Well, it's moved quite a bit. That's probably from taking out that end play. I think you get the gist of it there. It's just a matter of making sure when you've got everything tight, when you've tightened up your first screw, just double check your timing again that nothing's moved. It's quite hard to do from behind the camera here too. So I've just loosened that very slightly, and I'm just going to readjust that. No end play, that's good. Just nip that screw again. It's got it. I'm removing the needle bar clamp there. and then just making sure that these screws here are tight. And then I would double check the work again by putting the clamp back on, setting the 2.4mm needle bar rise, and just double checking that timing to make sure everything's in order there. If the machine was working fine before the gear broke, you'd have to assume that the needle bar height is correct. I won't go through that in this video. You can get a fair idea just by going to the widest stitch width, and on the left hand throw, providing the hook is above the needle eye, that, you know, within reason, it's only slightly above the needle eye, you know, safe to say it's going to work, especially if it was working, you know, before the gear broke. I mean, we haven't changed the needle bar height at all in any of these adjustments, so I wouldn't go playing with that. So now it's just a matter of putting the feed dogs back on. Bit of a trick to this. Get your 2 screws in. Just tight enough, those screws just tight enough to hold the feed dog in place, but loose enough to adjust, you know, just to actually line this up with the plate. So just a fraction tighter there. Yeah, so that's pretty good. That's enough to hold it, and then you just put the plate on. Might just go a little bit tighter on that right screw. Put the plate on, and just make sure that the feed dogs are centrally lined up in the holes there, so the same space either side, and also that they're straight and not skewed off to one side like that or like that direction. That looks pretty good from here, from what I can see behind the camera. Pull the plate back off, try not to move the feed dogs out of position, and then just same as before, just a little bit of fabric there to protect, screwdriver to support there, and just a good nip up on these screws. Check alignment, that looks fine there. And now it's just a matter of putting faceplate back on. Just be aware that when you're putting this cover back on, that you should pull the foot bar up. Push the foot bar up, and that will allow the screw holes to line up there. Because the foot lifter is part of the mechanism, and you need the foot bar to come up so that the foot lifter can go under it. So I'll go ahead and put this back on, screw the 2 screws back in, put the spring on, and we should be fairly close to testing the machine. So I've put the faceplate back on, and also the base here as well. One of the major causes of this problem is putting the machine into reverse whilst you're using the stretch type cams, the double cams. So if I install one of those and we'll bring the stitch dial around to A there, and width on maximum, this follower here, this cam follower here, is actually responsible for the reversing. So when it comes up onto a high spot on this cam here, it actually puts the machine into reverse. You can see that here. So, sorry, other way around. High spot will be forward, and then low spot is reversing. Forward and reverse. But I suspect if you hold this reversing lever across, and you're on and it's in the low spot, it'll let you do it because it's actually in reverse mode at the moment because this cam has put it there. But if you come across here, hold that and held that tight, stopped it. See, this is coming back to forward mode, so it's actually forcing this reverse lever back into forward mode, like that. I'm just lightly holding that lever, and then I'm just keeping pressure on it. See, it's heading back and forward. But if you held that tight and stopped that from returning, if you held that in there tight like that, and the machine's turning, this is trying to force the machine back into forward mode, but you're stopping it with the finger here, forcing it into reverse. It'll put a lot of pressure on this point here, and effectively what that'll do is it'll try and stop this from turning, the Elnagraph from turning. And if there's too much force there, something's going to give, and generally what it is it's the Elnagraph drive pinion gear will fail in exactly the way that I've shown it here. So never use reverse here when using the double Elnagraph discs. Any other disc, single is fine. Any double disc, don't use the reverse here at all. Avoid it. Putting the lid back on. All set to go. So there we have the cam stack drive pinion gear all replaced and working. Thanks very much for watching.